When it comes to arrangement, contrast is the single most common word I keep repeating to students who come to me for my music production coaching, as well as to my Patreon members who ask me for feedback on their tracks. High contrast is key to a great arrangement that's both engaging and memorable. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to increase the contrast of your arrangement in 3 different ways. But first, what I actually mean by contrast is that something is strikingly different from something else. Visually, the highest possible contrast would be black and white, but right next to each other. And in the music world, that would be the loudest, most intense part of the track, followed by complete silence. I want to ask you, what do you think makes a break a break? Is it that the bass is cut away? Is it the introduction of a new hook element? Is it the build-up? Well, it's all of these things, but none of them individually. What a break really is just a lower energy section of the song. Do you think a break would still be a break if nothing changed from the moment leading up to it? Of course not. It needs to somehow contrast the main section of the song. Basically, if there's no contrast, it feels like nothing is happening. There's no story being told, and it gets boring quickly. So here's the first and probably most important way to introduce contrast in your arrangement. So let's say you're transitioning from a chorus section into a breakdown, like right here. We go into a breakdown. And then we go back into the drop. And tell me, can you notice what's wrong here? Right now, the hi-hats and the claps are playing all the way throughout. They're playing before the breakdown, during the breakdown, and after the breakdown on the drop. What the heck? That's boring. What if we simply remove the drums from the breakdown? That's much better in my opinion. There's just so much more space to breathe in this breakdown. Let's hear the drop. That's still not perfect, but I think that's just so much better. We could also remove the bass from just before the drop hits to add even more contrast. Adding and subtracting elements at the right times is probably the most powerful way to make your arrangement more engaging. It might seem like a no-brainer, but I want you to really intentionally think about it the next time you're going to be arranging a track. Actually, think of it like this. Imagine your arrangement as a line on a graph where the x-axis is the time and the y-axis is the energy level of your track. So when you increase the energy level by adding the hi-hat, for example, the line would go up. And in the case of that breakdown, when the drums are present all throughout, the line slightly goes down at the breakdown. You see, we removed the kick and some other things as well. And then slightly goes up at the drop again. When you remove the drums from the breakdown, however, the energy graph line significantly goes down at the breakdown. Then when you take away the bass, it also drops a little bit more. And on the drop, it shoots all the way back up. But see, in both scenarios, the energy on the drop rises to the same exact level, that's not changing, but the difference in how much it raises is much greater in the second example. See, is it starting to make sense now? If you want your arrangement to be engaging, make that line go all over the place. And this also very much works on the smaller scale. Let's look at a section where a new hi-hat is being introduced. If we were to pull up the energy graph analogy that I just made up, it will look something like this. See, it rises here, nothing crazy. But if we, for example, take away the kick, just before the change actually happens, the new hi-hat seems much more impactful just because we took away the kick for a second. This difference is so much greater than this one. Crazy stuff, isn't it? So keep that in mind, if you can keep things in there, because I'm sure your mind was just blown. But also keep in mind that the energy graph doesn't always tell the full story. So let me show you. Let's come back to that breakdown for a second. And the problem I had with it wasn't that the hats were playing during the breakdown. I'm not saying it's illegal to have your drums play in breakdowns, absolutely not. The problem I had with it was that the drums were playing all the way throughout. There was very little contrast in between the different sections, but it could work just as well if you have the hi-hats playing the breakdown and only remove them when the drop hits, for example. See, that could work, depending on what kind of drop you want. In this case, the energy level might not be changing as much, but the energy type, I guess, is changing. So there's still contrast. It's like if the line on the graph suddenly changed colors or something. I don't know. You get what I'm saying, though. And also when you're arranging the track, just ask yourself, what do I want the energy level to be in this section? And is that represented in the amount of elements that are present in here? And now I want you to introduce you to the second way of introducing contrast in your arrangement. And this one's a little bit more advanced, so buckle up. I'm going to play two variations of the same build-up. Here's number 1. And here's number 2. I don't know about you, but I prefer the second one. So let's break down what's happening. Firstly, there's automation, which is slowly taking away the bass so that there's less and less bass until all of the bass quickly comes back on the drop. It's taking away energy in the bass department so there can be more contrast when it comes back. And this is what the energy graph would look like just on the bass. The second thing I've done is I've automated the reverb decay time on the main hook element. So here's what it sounds like when I solo it. The reverb decay time is by far my favorite thing to automate and build up. It's a really simple way to build a massive wall of noise and an equally simple way to dissipate it. With the reverb dry wet at exactly 50%, I start off with the decay time at the minimum, so 200 milliseconds, where you basically don't hear the reverb at all, and I gradually increase it to like around 15 seconds, so that it's very washed out. But I also decrease it back down to the minimum just before the drop. Just so that, you know, there's even more contrast. And I've also doubled this wall of noise with a snare buildup. This is some simple 909 snares put on every 16th note. And in this case, I'm automating the volume gain of the snares, as well as the filter cutoff of them, so that they gradually get louder and louder. And just like with the reverb, these snares also get less intense right before the drop. So for the track overall, it would build and build until it can't build anymore, so it dissipates to almost nothing. And then it shoots all the way back up with the drop being at maximum intensity. And that is incredibly powerful. It's just such a cool moment when the main hook comes back from being so washed out and the drop hits. I love it. I keep using it all the time. And if you want to go one step further, you can even automate the stereo width of the track. In this case, I used Ableton's utility plugin to gradually make the sound more and more mono, and on the drop, I made it go all the way back to stereo. And that adds even more contrast because you're going from mono to stereo. So yeah. Automations are pretty cool. These are just some ideas on how you can use them. I'm sure there's countless more ways, but the principles that I just showed you should apply no matter what. But there is one more way to add contrast. I mean, I'm sure there's countless ways, but there's one more way that we're going to talk about in this video. And this one's actually my favorite one. If you master this, your arrangements will skyrocket in terms of being memorable and replayable. Right now, I basically want you to find the most crucial moments in your arrangement and just make them more interesting. I'm talking about adding one-off effects and unique variations that happen only a couple of times in the entire track. Because these one-off moments, in my opinion, that's what your track's personality and identity is made of. To illustrate this, if you're using your own vocals in the track, the verses lyrics are probably going to be repeated only once or twice in the entire track. Contrast to the chorus, which is probably repeating the main hook over and over again. Let me show you how I apply this in my breakdowns, because I think I've gotten pretty good at this, not gonna lie. So this is a break section in another one of my tracks that I've been working on recently. And I'm just going to play it once, and after that, I'm gonna go through each thing that happens here in detail.
I to wcale nie tak, że inni są gorsi, albowiem są zwyczajnie mniej lepsi. A ja jestem panem wszechświata. A czemu? Otóż... Ja po prostu jestem lepszy.
So the first thing that we hear is this small little effect. It just adds to the ambience, I guess. Then we have a reverse swell into the vocals.
I to wcale nie tak.
And speaking of the vocals, they're completely unique. They happen only once in this entire track. And yeah, they're in Polish because I'm very much Polish, so it doesn't matter what the lyrics say, it's just that they're there, okay? And then we have an impact effect coming in right here.
A ja jestem.
That's pretty cool. I like how it adds to the atmosphere. And after that vocal, I also have this thunder sound effect. Also just to add to the ambience. And after that, what's also happening, a small detail, is the main lead is also washing out at the end of this phrase, because I've automated the delay on here, right at the end. Now we've got the snares.
Ja po prostu jestem lepszy.
And this section just kind of speaks for itself, But this also applies to adding variations in other parts of the track, like the lead right here, for example. You can add a variation like this just before something new happens, just before a new section. That's where I usually add variations like these. See, there's the right being introduced at that point. after the variation. And that obviously doesn't have to happen only once in the track. You can add it to your track every like 16 bars or so, where it will start to act as a sort of announcement of the next section. And very quickly, your listeners will start to associate hearing that variation with something interesting. Interesting? What the fuck? With something interesting happening right after. And that right there, my friend, is an emotional connection that your listeners are subconsciously forced to make in their brains. And that's fucking powerful, you know? Your song becomes much more engaging because of that. Their mind has to do all sorts of math shit to process it. I don't know, I'm not a scientist. This is very much bro science. But speaking of contrast, you certainly don't want to overdo it. There is a sweet spot to be found. Just like this image would be too high of a contrast, this track would probably be too high contrast as well. See, what the fuck is that? That doesn't even feel coherent anymore. It doesn't make sense. And of course, on the other hand, a lack of contrast can also be an artistic decision. Like if you're going for more of a soundscape or an ambient vibe, you might not want to have too high of a contrast. And since I showed the high contrast image before, I guess a low contrast would be parallel to images like these. And that's an entirely different style of its own, right? But really, I just want you to be thinking more intentionally about this stuff when you're arranging, because I think this is really going to be helpful in creating a great arrangement. Speaking of, I still haven't really told you how to actually arrange your tracks, have I? Well, I've developed a certain arrangement formula for myself that I find myself using time and time again, and it's pretty fun. It just involves becoming Eminem, Shakespeare, and a wizard, in that exact order. I don't have enough time right now to elaborate on that, but I did make a video where I explain each step of the process in detail. Go watch it right now, and I'll see you there. Cheers.